Make them work.
But Eileen's going to go through some of the soil health indicators. We got Rick Nielsen out of our own soil scientist on our technology staff there. And as we go through this, we're going to talk about we've been talking about all this soil health stuff. We've kind of got to get right down to it. Okay, what are the very indicators that we're looking for that tell us soil health is going up, down, or where it's going? And it's some of this, we'll talk inside a little more of the difference between soil quality and soil health. Eileen's going to tell you about the difference between soil quality that is inherent and then dynamic properties that we, as we manage, can change. But I'm going to ask Rodney, because they're probably going to steal him, or I don't know what the video crew is going to do, but Rodney, right before we get started, what are some things that you've actually seen, maybe from soil test, organic matter, some things that you've seen change on the soil across the farm?
Oh boy.
Rodney.
So, yeah, kind of everything has changed over the last 20 years across the farm. We see, these guys will be able to give you a better feel, I guess, than I can, because I'm not out in the neighbors' fields a lot, but we do enough. That's one of the fun things about having a drainage business. We do see what's going on in other places, and the soil color you've got there, the organic matter. We've seen our organic matters since I started doing those 1 acre grids. I have to continually, I base a lot of our seeding rates and things on organic matter, and I have to continually adjust those equations because those numbers are coming up consistently, with a couple of percent in a lot of cases over the last 20 years, which is just tremendous for soil structure, for water holding, for all that. We see the rooting, we see earthworms. If we get a chance when we go back in, I'll run through, after we're done, if anybody wants to see or whatever, but some of the slides I've got of digs that I've done when there was actually moisture in the ground, where you could see a little better the structure and things. But when we put in tile, we go through, we've got the wheel trenching machine that's in there. We also got a tile plow. That tile plow is a tremendous indicator of soil quality, both in how hard it pulls and what the soil does after you go through with that. We just see where we're out on custom conventional tilled soils, big blocks, tabletops coming up, and hard, just soil that just looks like it's been beat to death. In a field like this, you can see it even as dry as it was a little bit here where we dug the hole yesterday. The soil just falls apart. It's black and it's loose and it falls apart, and when that tile plow goes through, the majority of the dirt just crumbles right back in the hole. I mean, it's just the texture and everything has just changed so much. It's hard to say it any other way other than it's just there's every spadeful it's not if you're gonna find a worm, it's how many worms you're gonna find. It's the biology and everything that's going on. This field here was 5 years of continuous corn. I went to soybeans this year for some rotation issues on balancing out, because we wanted to take some other fields to continuous corn. I wanted to see what happened. Obviously, it'd be nice if it got a little drink. We're getting some yellowing and whatnot, but so we've had that. Not a lot of cover crops on this field. For those of you that are here the other days, we got a lot more cover crops. The other field that will be where the other pit is at, we have no-till manure, or what we call no-till manure, which is a dragline applicator with a Dietrich sweep, very low surface disturbance, applying about 6 inches deep in a horizontal plane into a living cover crop, so we can get the cover crop established quickly, and do that for our no-till manure. We do about 400 acres of that a year. Works really, really well. The stuff we do in the fall, we don't do anything to come spring. The stuff in the spring, we might hit it with a harrow or something just to even out the knife marks a little bit. But anyway, yeah, just it's soil quality. I hope that's what they find here. But there was also a little water down there, so that's encouraging.
All right, we'll turn it over. Eileen, are you?
I could just do this all afternoon. So.
She's having an awful lot of fun down there. I don't know whether we should disturb her.
So this is my archaeological dig here. Some of you know that I'm into earthworms and night crawlers, and so...
Click your microphone on.
Oh. Okay, is this on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, so some of you know I'm into earthworms and night crawlers, and so a pit like this, you know, you could just spend all afternoon just kind of doing your own little archaeological dig. In fact, we should have a few people down here, but just in the last few minutes, we basically saw a hole here that looked like it was probably a night crawler, and I'm just kind of carefully picking away at it, and this flag is going down the hole so I can kind of pull it away. And that kind of a night crawler channel is going to do us a lot of good in a number of ways. What kind of ways do you think it's going to help us out? Root channels, yep. This one doesn't happen to have a root growing in it right now, but it's going to be a great place for a root to grow. What else? Water, huge thing. Again, this is not the time of year or the year to look for middens, but the night crawlers, I think some of you know that night crawlers make little huts on top of the ground, right? Middens, and it's basically where they've pulled residue around the mouth of their burrow, and they start to pull it down into their burrow, and so that's the entrance to the night crawler channel, and the night crawler channel could easily go 3 or 4 or 5 feet deep, but that's going to be a really big thing for getting water to infiltrate into the soil. And I was able to see a few kind of mashed down middens. Even night crawlers at this time of year just aren't going to be, or this dry of a year aren't going to be active right now. So there's probably a night crawler down there somewhere, 5 feet deep, kind of hanging out. I did want to mention before I jumped into my night crawlers, when we're talking about soil quality or soil health, I mean, look around the landscape. Some of this, we want to want to distinguish a little bit between inherent soil quality and dynamic. Any of you who have taken a soils course or who have worked with soils even for a small amount of time, right? Our soils here in central Indiana and the soils in Georgia and the soils in Kentucky and the soils in Minnesota are inherently different because of the 5 soil forming factors. What might those be? Parent material, yep. Time. Climate.
Topography.
Vegetation, or let's just say organisms, which would be vegetation and soil biology. And then what was the 5th one? Slope, right. Not much slope here. Okay, so those 5 soil forming factors have been operating here over 10 or 15,000 years, and in some other places over 100,000 or maybe even 500,000 years. So we're not talking about trying to change those, right? We have some inherent capacity of these soils that's a given, okay? But there are some other properties that build on what we have given here from Mother Nature over thousands of years and in the climate that we have that we can affect. And that's really what we're talking about with either calling it dynamic soil quality or soil health. I don't really care which one you call it, but it's basically saying there are some things that we can change, and that's what we're trying to focus on. There are things that we have allowed to degrade, and there are things that we can build back up, okay? So that's what the soil quality indicators are about. It's to try to give us a way of evaluating some of those properties. Again, those of you who are here for the next 2 days are going to be trying out the soil health test kit and are going to get to measure some of those. For those of you who aren't, you're just going to get a snippet of that today. But again, any one indicator is just that, right? The name says indicator. It's not giving us if we find earthworms or don't find earthworms. That's one way, that's one measure, but as much as I love earthworms and I love to see earthworms, if a soil doesn't have earthworms, that's not necessarily saying it's a terrible soil if all the other indicators are pretty good, okay? So it's just one of a suite of indicators that we want to take a look at, okay? Happens to be my favorite one, okay? So, okay, so that's one indicator. Do we have earthworms? And do we have just one kind of earthworm here? No.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, what kind of earthworms do we have? Night crawlers is one. That's right. That's that nice big hole. Okay. Anybody? Do we have another kind besides night crawlers?
Redworms.
Redworms. Okay. And where do they live?
Good question.
Good question. Okay. They don't go this deep. So the redworms, and there's 2 or 3 different species of them, they live pretty much in the topsoil. And then the night crawlers are the ones that go deep. I think it's important to have both, okay? They do different things. The redworms basically work the topsoil, increase the porosity of the topsoil, mix materials up. The night crawlers go down and do all the things that we just talked about. Barry, was it at this pit yesterday, didn't we come across a few of those little guys?
Yes, we did.
So at this time of year, the earthworms are smarter than we are, right? It's too hot and too dry, so they just go into a little resting stage. And so we did happen to come across a few of them yesterday that they're all balled up and they secrete a mucus to try to keep from drying out, and they just basically sleep the summer away, and then when it gets moist and cool in the fall, they'll become active again, and then in the winter they'll go into a hibernation stage. So generally this is not the time of year if you're trying to look for earthworms, and particularly this year. So we may or may not actually come across any of them, but that's okay. All right, so besides getting water and air and roots growing down the soil, this one I marked here, and again, a few of you should come down in the pit, but you can use your telephoto eyesight. There's some of the organic material. The night crawlers will basically put some cast, which is the excrement material. An advantage a cover crop has is that the roots are penetrating during a time of year when the soil's moist. Usually, okay? Fall. And so those roots can grow down here, and then basically those roots are going to be opening up additional channels that the corn roots or the soybean roots can follow. You got something there, Barry?
Yeah, we've got evidence of other roots that have been following essentially an earthworm channel on down, pretty far down. Now this looks like this was probably not this year's soybean root, maybe last year's corn root, something like that, but they do regularly follow that highly nutritious path that earthworm left behind, and that's a nutrient contribution that's really kind of a guess how
Right.
much that contribution is, because we really don't have that included in any of our nutrient management literature or recommendations or anything, but we know it's beneficial. It has to be, especially at a time like this where the only place the plant is getting any nutrient or getting any water is deep, and so the only place it's going to get any nutrient has to come from deep too. So if we don't have that nutrient-rich channel to draw from, they'd be getting water, but it would be a nutrient-deficient kind of source of water compared to without the earthworms.
So Eileen, how many do you expect in an acre? Earthworms.
I do per square meter. 100 to 200 per square meter would be good for central Indiana no-till field with cover crops. 100 to 200 earthworms per square meter. Redworms, 10 to 20 per square meter for a night crawler. Okay, the per acre just is a really wow factor, but if you're actually counting them, right, you can imagine 100 per square meter. I can't imagine 800,000 per acre, which is I think what 200, I think 100 per square meter is 400,000 per acre, I think. But that doesn't mean anything to me. 100 per square meter means something to me. Yes?
How many earthworms and redworms do you think would be in an acre of a till field?
Of a tilled field. Excellent question. Less than in a no-till field. But exactly how much less, I don't know. Maybe only 40,000 per acre instead of 400,000. Maybe 10 times less.
And Mike for about 5 minutes. They're filming over there while we do this, and it's too much to do both. Thank you.
Unplug.
Can I talk though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can a drought kill earthworms?
Yes. Yes. So earthworms, they have a seasonal cycle, right? They're both more active in the spring, but also more numerous in the spring. And then some of them die in the summer, and some of them just go into a resting stage, and then you know, the fall goes up again and the winter goes down. But year to year variations are going to be huge. Probably a little less variation for the night crawlers. They reproduce more slowly. They're not as many to begin with. They can go down to the bottom of their burrow. But the red worms, you know, they may go down 15, 18 inches during the summer, but if it's a prolonged dry spell, they may not be able to survive that entire time. So that's one of the problems. That's a great question leading into an indicator. An indicator should be something that's easy to measure, relatively easy to measure, and that really indicates something. The challenge with a lot of our indicators is there is no magic number that is the right number, and some of these things vary a lot from year to year, and an earthworm population would be one of those. You would certainly still, with an indicator, you'd want to be comparing it to something else, right? So if I just take an earthworm count here and I get 10 per square meter, you know, I might go, oh my gosh. But if I go to a conventional field and I get 1, then still on a relative basis we're improved. But I think you always have to be comparing it to something, and that's one of the challenges we have, I think, Barry, with soil health, is what's our comparison? Yeah. So we're typically comparing, you know, no-till or no-till and cover crops to a conventional side by side, or as close as we can get to it. So okay, well, earthworms are important, but there are other indicators, I guess. So let's.
Just a little side note, because carbon is so important in the soil, NRCS has taken on a project where we've done a lot of sampling, and one of the things they're looking for is carbon, and they're trying to associate that with the management that's been on that particular site. And the intent is they want to have some semblance of baseline data so they can see if we involve a project like this where we're trying to involve soil health into everything, can we see some trend of improvement? So in order to do that, we need baseline data to get it done. So we've sampled, I can't remember the number now, but it's several 100,000 sites across the country.
And just completed
almost
that,
purely
didn't they,
at
Trav?
organic carbon. That number about right?
Yeah, we did about,
Nationwide.
I say 10,000 here this week. When you got time 18, about 180,000.
I mean, it's, for the type of sampling that we do, it's a lot of samples, and it should give us something that we can extrapolate across a broader area and give us a baseline data for what type of organic stocks do we have in the soil. And in 5 years or 10 years, if we continue this trend of moving towards soil health and trying to build organic matter, we might be able to resample them and see if we actually can see if we're actually getting an improvement.
Are you getting, what depth is being sampled on that?
They're sampling the upper meter, if I remember right.
Okay,
Five replications per site.
Okay. Good, upper meter, so not just the topsoil, because that's, yeah, right. Yeah.
While you're talking about topsoil, it's pretty clear. It's easy to see here the difference between our topsoil and subsoil, or was earlier. I don't know if
We're in the shadow now.
we're in the shadow now. We might have. One thing that's probably true about this site, I don't know, Rodney, I lost you again, but we go over there. When this building was built, it kind of looks like, I don't know if some spoil might have got out here, some construction traffic. There's some of this that looks a little packed, and it looks a little more like it's a disturbed soil, a little less than native, at least, condition, which I could see that could happen if we built a building right here. And then this is a place in the soil, in the farm, where you're probably going to have more frequent traffic, back to that mechanical part of soil quality. So, you know, to be able to get water infiltration and earthworms in a site even like this would kind of be the worst place in this field. It would be that we picked. However, for today's purposes, we didn't have to walk as far, and they don't have a big hole in the middle of our field. So it works for today.
Right. Right, yeah, it looks like the old tilled layer, that's about right there, but Rick pointed out that over here, it looks like we might have had some fill. So we've got some dark,
Looks like it gets darker right about in here. So this may have been the original surface if this land was sloping off a little bit. And as they've done all the construction, material's been brought in, and this material in here looks different than what you see from here down. So you might actually have some new, different material that was added in after the fact up here.
This would be the third set of buildings on this property, so.
Who knows, historically, it could have,
Yeah, there were barns and things right in this area, and buildings before that even, so it's likely that anything right through here has been moved at some point.
As Barry said, this is convenient for this particular exercise. For those of you staying on the rest of the week, when you work on your test kits, you kind of have to think about where you.
Channels down there, that's also bringing carbon down below, right? So that was part of the reason I asked what depth they're sampling the carbon. But as Barry said, it's very difficult to get at whether it's the carbon part or the nutrient part. When we do soil sampling for almost anything, and you've got nightcrawler channels and root channels that are scattered throughout the subsoil, and it's not uniformly mixed, it's very difficult to know how you would sample that, okay? So when people study stuff like this, you know, we dig a pit and you scrape the casting and you measure what's in there, but can you imagine how do we do that if we're trying to do soil fertility sampling? We basically don't know how to do that. We don't do that. And so it's not really very clear yet how you would use the knowledge that we have that things are going on down there, but how we would actually use that for management. But when you think about sequestering carbon, anytime you can move some of that carbon down below, then you're going to be doing, you're going to be doing that as well. Okay, so we talked about carbon and color. What about roots? Is that one of our indicators? Can we get roots down below? We've got a few.
see it better.
There where Rick is, real good.
We've got some roots that have gotten down here. Again, when you're on a pit face, you're not going to be seeing huge volumes of roots, but yesterday we were able to see some roots that were in some of these channels that were night crawlers, and you can just see some roots coming out the pit face. So the roots are getting down into the moist material. The other thing was that yesterday, and we still say that today, this morning, even there's a lot of moisture down below, and so the soybeans in this field are probably not really suffering from lack of moisture, because there's a fair amount of moisture down in that soil. So part of the job is to make sure roots can get down to that moisture.
If the roots can get to that, we can keep that plant alive. We can keep what Rodney said, hope. We can keep hope alive.
Yeah.
But when we've got this much moisture that those roots now can access. We have that compaction layer down where those roots can't access this, then they're really hurting. Now drought is really going to hurt us. I don't know if you can feel it. There's just pretty good moisture here.
At the layer of where there's
Even with virtually no rain since May.
at the part where it's mostly moisture, is that where you usually get clay from?
That's where there is a higher percent of clay. Our soil science can tell you is that we're encouraging earthworms. We're using cover crops to build deeper root channels that are storing more carbon, and as those decompose and over, we're not coming in with tillage every year and cutting this off so we have to start from scratch. We think, I don't know that we would love to have endless money for research for this stuff, but we think we can we can do a better job of sequestering carbon deep into the soil profile that is a much more stable place to put it, rather than just building organic matter at the surface that one tillage operation can send it off into the atmosphere in one single pass. We get it down here stored with the cover crops and the continuous no-till. Now we've got a much more stable place, or hypothetically we would think that there's a more secure place for that carbon to be stored in the soil.
Question.
Yes, back to the carbon in the soil, organic matter. I'm wondering, that's not in a test kit thing, right? That you have to send to a lab? And I'm just wondering how much that costs. Like, you did 10,000 of them. Could farmers do that? And would you recommend it? And how much would it cost to continue that test?
You can get soil organic matter for a small additional fee on a soil fertility test.
Yeah,
So you could do it all of it, but you wouldn't go then that deep.
but it's only
Would
just
we-
deep.
And would that be what you would recommend? Would that one be good enough, or do you recommend that farmers go deeper?
We're going to look at some new tests this week that are looking at even labile carbon, which there's a difference in carbon. Labile carbon or active carbon is probably a more beneficial carbon than just what I'd call the old carbon that is more stable in the soil, but it is where we're getting more cycling of nutrients and water and things. And we've got numerous. The class tomorrow we'll take some tests for reactive carbon. That is a new test. Tell them, Ray, what that's going to involve.
It's called the Salvita kit, and it was done by Dr. Rick Haney from ARS, and also Alan. What's Alan's last name again? Franzluber?
Alan Franzluber.
Franzluber, thank you. I always mess that one up. But the whole thing is, it's based on, like Barry was talking about, the labile, the active carbon, what the organisms see. And it's based on that first day of CO2 respiration. So the higher the respiration that first day, the higher the fertility. And they've done it in a 15 peer review research. So we got that, it's a little plastic container, we're gonna fill it up with soil tomorrow. We'll probably fill it up this evening or tomorrow. Because we got Thursday, we'll do it tomorrow. And we have little paddles, and you'll be able to, and it'll give you a reading. So we'll be able to do that, and they're about $10 a piece, $10 to $15 a piece to do.
And just in the last year, even like some of the commercial labs, Brookside Labs, have now added a soil health test that they will do as you send in your pre-side dress nitrate test, which pre-side dress nitrate tests are a foot deep.
Okay.
And you're trying to test for nitrate, available nitrate, before you would side dress and add more nitrogen. Well, they're adding this soil health test to try to assess what the contribution from the organic matter might be, and they're trying to get a baseline where we can handle that, and that's really going to help us as we look at adaptive nutrient management. You know, we're going to try to figure out, even within the growing season, what should be our very, very smartest application of nitrogen without putting on too much. That's going to help us reduce the amount that comes out those tiles and things like that. So just in the last year, several new tests have come online and been available to farmers. So that's really exciting for us as far as being able to look at that and assess that.
So on the lines of carbon, there's just total carbon or total organic matter, which is the standard test. That does not change very fast. So there are these other different fractions that people are interested in. So they're talking about one that's called active carbon or labile carbon. There's another one called POM, particulate organic matter. And that's really, if you lift up the residue here, before you get down into the really hard baked soil, even in here, there's a few soil aggregates that are right there at that interface between the residue and the soil. And so some of that would be considered particulate organic matter, and that's also sometimes used as an estimate of some of the more active carbon that's related to what's going to be releasing and cycling nutrients more quickly. Again, that's not a standard test, but those are some of the things folks are looking at. What about the aggregation in this top dry soil? We've got
aggregation, which we tested somewhat with the slate test up there, but it is an indicator that we want to look at for soil health or soil quality.
So we look at the interface right there where Barry's digging. That's called the detritus sphere, and that's where that interface, like we were talking about, how aggregates form. A typical lifetime of an aggregate is about 27 days in field conditions. So you're always building aggregates, and aggregates are being diminished. Even a plant root going in there, you can diminish an aggregate, but they also build aggregates, so that's the longevity of some of the typical aggregates in the soil.
Something that is fragile about this part of the soil, this is where all of the good things are building and improving from, is right here at this level. This is a very important spot. And so when you hear me talk about to farmers, a lot of farmers use vertical tillage. They say, well, I'm only going that deep, and I'm leaving all the residue on the surface. Why is that not as good as no-till? And it might be in any given year as good as no-till for yield production and those kinds of things. But if you're truly going to build long-term soil function, if you oxidize, aerate, and disturb this area right here, it's the area that is trying to build infiltration and aggregate stability from this point. It's the most important place to have aggregate stability is right here. And if we turn that to dust in an effort to dry soil out, it's going to be next to impossible to ever make improvements from that point forward on down. It really sets us back as to what we're trying to accomplish in building organic matter and building aggregate stability.
It also holds the particles, so it prevents it from wind erosion, from water impact.
Right.
So that's why it's so critical that you have that interface that Barry's talking about. You want that present in a healthy soil. You should see a detritus sphere. You should see, I call it the cottage cheeseville. That's where that little aggregates, it looks like little cottage cheese. So I call the gratisphere cottage cheese area. You should see that present in your soils. In a till system, you won't see that cottage cheese, the little baby type scenario.
Now, I mean, this is probably still compacted here. I mean, we've got some evidence of clayey structure up near the surface. This is certainly not what I would have normally thought of for a good no-till system, but it's probably because we've had way too much. I mean, we've had turn rows and traffic and everything, but in spite of that, I provided Ray with one of the things he used for the slate test this morning from the surface of this pit, and it held together. I was actually pretty amazed that it did as well as it had, as it did, given that right in here, certainly he's had a lot of traffic actually and so on. So it's not, right at the surface, it's maybe not quite as good as you would expect on a no-till field if you were out in the field. What about bulk density, Barry? I think bulk density of that surface thing is pretty dense.
It's a little dense right here. Same reason. It's back to the very discussion we had about the weight of all this heavy equipment, what that can do to the soil. Just like Ray's difference in measurement, overgrazed pasture was heavier, over-trafficked crop fields will be heavier. That is what we mean by when we say increased bulk density. High bulk density is a bad thing. We want porosity. A really ideal soil is half something and half nothing, right? In other words, half soil and mineral and half pore space. So you want the ideal soil needs to be half and half something, half nothing. That's a highly technical. You can use that
I'm
if
going
you
to
want.
remember that one. Amanda, will that work in my class?
I don't know, maybe.
I'll try that. Okay, so again, those of you who are going to do the soil health test kit are going to probably measure bulk density. And that's what we're looking for, though, is to have a lot of pore space to both allow water into the soil and to allow air into the soil and to retain water. What else do we have on our list here?
We got a question back here, Barry, why he dug a hole where the gravity wagons and the semis sit.
So we were feeling the pain, all these people that work in offices, and we didn't want to have to walk too far to the middle of the field. Mostly, all the stuff that the Ruans have done for their field, we didn't have the heart to go out there, drive across their field, and ask them to dig a hole way out in the middle of the field.